here's my newest novel. I just thought I would show it to you. What I'm going to do is I will speak. Whoops, is this going to crash it down? What I am going to do is, rather than start with a reading, I'm going to talk a little bit about my novel so that you know what it's about, because I will only be reading an excerpt, so I have to give you a bit of an introduction, and then I'll do some reading. So my new novel, Eva Solomon's War, is about a young Jewish woman who flees Nazi Germany in the 1930s and goes to Palestine, where the Jews are building their new homeland. But Eva doesn't follow the usual pattern of the Jewish immigrant of that era because she falls in love with this British policeman, a non-Jew. And this leads to her into trouble with her own community. It brings a lot of internal dilemma for her, and eventually a very nasty encounter with some extremists, with a group of extremists. So the book opens in 1933 in Germany, when Hitler has just come to power. He's been in power for 7 months. It's actually set in the town of Breslau in Germany. And Eva is 12 years old when the book opens, and she's living in her father's house with her older sister, Liesel. It's just the three of them, Eva, Liesel, and her father. Her mother died when she was still an infant, and the father is a rather rigidly Orthodox Jew, a man who is rather joyless and morose and authoritarian. In some ways more German than the Germans, which is not that uncommon for middle-class Jews of that era, even if they were Orthodox Jews. Now, Liesel, the older sister, she joins a labor Zionist youth group and emigrates to Palestine, leaving Eva alone with this difficult father. And Eva's also suffering from the oppression of being in the German public school system under the Nazis. So this is a hard time for her. Then her father finally wakes up to what's going on around and manages to emigrate to Palestine as well. And by that time it's 1937 and Eva is 17. And she and her father settle in Tel Aviv. Now, Tel Aviv of that time is not the modern, vibrant city we know today. It is a hard-scrabble development town, and it's a hard life for a new immigrant. And Eva's father, in particular, finds it pretty hard. Eva, too, because she has to cook and clean for her father, keep house, something that she's never done before, and it's under the primitive conditions of the time, it's very hard work. So that's where they are. And however, even though when she manages to get away from her father, she has a bit of a sense of independence, and then she does run away from him, and she has a sense of taste of freedom, and that's when she gets involved with this British police constable that I mentioned. Now, I just want to say a few words about the historical context, which is important to the story. All I want to tell you is that, what were the British doing there? So the British were given the mandate to administer Palestine from the League of Nations after World War I. And the idea was that they were to govern until the country could become self-governing. Now, in the meantime, their police and army kept law and order over the natives, quote. And the problem was, or part of the big problem was, that the so-called natives, the Arab population and the Jewish population, had very conflicting views about what they wanted the new country, the self-governing country, to become. And and that was that the Jews wanted open immigration for their brethren who were fleeing Europe, and they wanted a Jewish homeland. And they felt this had been promised to them by the British. The Arabs, local Arabs, felt that wanted Arab hegemony over the country, and they felt that had been promised by the British as well. And indeed, the British had made contradictory promises to both peoples. And so that led to a bit of a problem. Now, the British had their own geopolitical interests, and they were not in a hurry to leave, and the divisions kind of helped them stay. However, the situation did blow up in their faces in terms of revolt and tension, and so throughout the 30 years of the British Mandate, there was a lot of conflict, three-way power struggles, and a multifaceted mess. And so I'm telling you all this just so you have some idea of why it might have been not so well looked upon for a nice Jewish girl to have this boyfriend who was not Jewish, but also a representative of the occupying power. The very people who were for the Jewish community standing in the way of the Jewish homeland, the Zionist dream. Okay, and one other thing I want to mention is that I spoke about the three-way power struggle. There's also internecine conflict within the Jewish community between what we might today call a left and a right. So that you have your different factions in the Zionist movement. The story of Eva Solomon's War is loosely based on some personal family history. It is fiction, so it is maybe inspired by true events. I too had an aunt who went to Palestine in the 1930s, and she did indeed fall in love with a British policeman, and she had a rather nasty encounter with some extremists, as does my heroine. My heroine, though, is a very different character, but that's another thing. It was, I knew about this, but I only knew the bare bones of this story, and it was only told to me in whispers from my mother, actually. And I could only conjecture actually now why I didn't hear more. And I think it was because it's a sad and troubling story, but also it was somewhat shameful because Jews were not supposed to be hurting other Jews. They're not supposed to hurt each other anytime, but especially after all that happened in the Holocaust, and people are struggling for their homeland, and so this is not a nice story. And finally, I think also why the story was rather hushed up in our family was maybe because there was an underlying question. How much did my aunt bring some of this misfortune upon herself? Was the victim entirely blameless? I think maybe there's a question there. So I was never able to ask my aunt directly what had happened. She died fairly young, before I was at an age and stage to ask her the questions that I would like to ask now. And so I decided to try to explore through the process of writing fiction why these things happen, what happened, what is the significance, and if there is some kind of reverberation today for with such a story. So the last thing I want to just, in terms of my introductory comments, is to tell you a little bit about the challenges I had in writing this novel, which took me a long time. I wanted to make, one challenge was to make sure that the history, the historical setting, didn't overwhelm the story and become center stage. I wanted the characters and their unfolding lives to be the center part of the story. So I think in writing historical fiction, one has to be careful not to make it a history book, but to make it a novel, a story. Another challenge I had was not to write this with 2020 hindsight of the 21st century, and to remain true to the perspectives of the people of that time. I myself, I don't like anachronisms in fiction, in historical fiction, and I don't like the imposition of contemporary points of view where they don't belong. So I wanted to try to avoid that. And finally, but another challenge I felt was to not make it a didactic book, and not to write with a message with a capital M. And yet, paradoxically, I was very aware I am writing from a 21st century perspective, and I actually, as I was writing, I wanted the book to reverberate or resonate with things that are happening today, to somehow bring I was aware that the reader, I would hope, or I myself, was aware of how these things of the past resonate with the conflicts that are occurring today in Israel, especially the divisions within the Zionist movement. So I was aware of that. I was also aware that even though I didn't want to make this a political book, there's no way of not somehow wading into the politics. So there's that, is there for sure. In other words, I wanted to have it both ways, to dance on this knife edge of writing something that was not preachy, but meaningful, and that offers some moral ambiguity and some meaning for today. And was I successful? The only people who can judge that is the potential reader. So that is my hope that you will someday be able to tell me. So that's it for introductory remarks. And now I'd like to read a scene from the novel, and what I'm going to read from is, this is when Eva and her father have been in Tel Aviv for a fairly short time, and as I mentioned, they are having their challenges adapting to this environment, and but at the same time, when Eva gets away from her dad a little bit, she finds quite a bit in Tel Aviv that is attractive to her. So here we go. Tel Aviv was raw, hectic, alive. People rushed about, faces full of purpose. On every corner, construction and scaffolding. Everywhere, crews of sweating, sun-bronzed youths in undershirts. Jews. They were Jews. The roads were a patchwork of newly laid asphalt, rubble, and sand. Smells of industry mingled in the air. Freshly poured cement, whitewash, exhaust fumes. Horns tooted, hammers rang out, traffic rumbled. Jewish traffic. Buses and motor cars of every description, bicycles, wagons drawn by horses and donkeys, hand carts and wheelbarrows, and the occasional flock of goats. Escaped our dingy flat, my feet stepped faster and my heart beat in happy concordance with the brash Tel Aviv rhythm. Others have found their place in the new Hebrew city. Perhaps, my heart whispered, so could I. Meanwhile, Papa saw only negatives. That buses came late, that passengers pushed and children yelled without being restrained, that many businesses ignored the Sabbath, that people bought on credit, and that women smoked out in the open in the broad light of day, and that both women and men paraded their half-naked bodies along the beach. Also, he vehemently disapproved that Hebrew, the holy tongue, was merely an everyday language here, used for notices about garbage collection and polluted with slang by louts on the street. Near dawn each morning, he set out to trudge the pavements, lugging 2 suitcases packed with his wares. At first, despite the climate, he dressed exactly as he had back in Breslau. Dark suit with waistcoat, knotted tie, and Homburg. The heat grew from week to week through the summer until it melted patches of asphalt and made sparrows gasp. Other businessmen wore open-necked, short-sleeved shirts and even short pants. Eventually, Papa gave up on the waistcoat and tie, but he retained his jacket. One had to maintain some standards. Despite his knowledge of biblical Hebrew, he had trouble with the everyday language. He insisted on addressing people in German. Those Ruskies and Polacks knew perfectly well what he was saying, Papa fumed. They laughed and called him Yeke, the consummate, unbending German Jew. Even fellow Yekes shook their heads over his stubborn ways. From dawn to dusk, Papa made his rounds of radio shops, lighting shops, appliance factories, and bit of everything establishments. He came home parched, sweat-drenched, sagging, and bitter. He lacked what it took to succeed in this new land. He wasn't a schmoozer, a hustler, a deal maker. Still, he trudged, redoubling his efforts, and the household money dwindled. One evening, as we sat at table over chicken feet soup, I broke our customary mealtime silence. I could go to work, I said, as casually as my thumping heart would allow. I could earn some money to help us out. Papa lowered his soup spoon and stared at me in astonishment. I won't neglect the household, I'll do both. You at a job? And what do you think you could do? A picture of some magazine sprang to my mind. I remembered a smartly dressed woman perched on a swivel chair with a phone wedged against her shoulder. Her head was tipped at a coquettish angle. Her exquisitely manicured fingers danced over a typewriter. I would like to become a secretary. I could answer phones and type. Is that so? Papa laid his spoon down beside his bowl. A sarcastic gleam came into his eyes, and the left side of his mouth twitched in a smirk. You have skills I'm unaware of. You have learned how to type and how to speak to strangers over the telephone. I squeezed my hands together under the table, but met his gaze head on. I'll go to the Jewish Workers' Federation and ask them to send me for training. Papa erupted in a series of mirthless snorts. The Jewish Workers' Federation. Why, your stupid papa has been slaving like a mule when all he had to do was go to the Federation. But all immigrants go there for help. Why should we? Because they're scoundrels, party hacks, socialist muckers. His fist smacked down on the table, making the cutlery rattle. Loud-mouthed boasters who act as if they can bring forth water out of stone. You think you know more than I do? You know nothing. First thing, they'll ask you where your father is from and how does he lean. Left, right, center, who? Is he one of our men or beyond the pale? Training, that's for girls whose fathers have protexia. Same as in the alleys of Lodz. That's how this country of heathens and scoundrels works. A wink here, a backslap there. You know what jobs that they find for girls like you fresh off the boat? House cleaning. They'll send you to scrub floors in the home of some labor Zionist macher. Some big shot who doesn't keep kosher. You'll earn a few piasters and many pinches of your bottom besides. He turned back to his soup, shoveling the broth into his mouth with brisk determination. But I want to try, I squeaked. Yes, he jerked his chin towards my neglected meal. Finish up. It's perfectly good food. Don't waste. You're worried about money, then eat what's in front of you. I worked hard enough to put it on the table. The smell of boiled chicken hung heavy in the air along with the stifling heat. I pushed the bowl away. I want to try it, I said again, more firmly. For response, Papa took each of the long yellow chicken toes into his mouth to suck the nourishment out of them. Afterwards, he finished my soup as well, and then, glaring at my downcast face, muttered to himself the grace after meals.
Yeah, do you want to talk about your writing process and then maybe something else you're interested in that?
Oh, I thought that was all part of the beginning.
Okay,
all at
sure.
the same time.
Okay, you did all.
That's
That's
my challenges.
Sure, that's totally
So I
fine.
don't have anything more prepared to say. I'm happy to answer any
Yeah,
questions.
questions? Sure. Yeah.
I put it. I should have mentioned that I rolled it all together.
Okay, that's totally
So,
fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that interested me in your reading was this tension that you talked about at the beginning between within Jewish groups in the founding of Israel, and how the Orthodox and the groups and the more politically progressive groups sometimes being at odds with one another. If I'm understanding what you
So
said.
I should have put a little more context, but I didn't want to overwhelm you. So in terms of divisions, like in terms of the political divisions, you had a mainstream Zionist movement. It was labor Zionists. It was under Ben-Gurion, and they were a more compromising group in terms of they were pragmatists, but compromising territorially as well. And then you had what we would today. I'm not sure that they use terms like left, right in those days, but you had a more ultra-nationalist movement that was far less compromising, or not compromising. They wanted more entire territory, and they felt that armed struggle was the only way to get the British out. And there's some one of the moral ambiguities of the book is somewhere underneath the question. Well, maybe there's some truth to that. The British wouldn't have left necessarily without armed struggle, but they were ultra-nationalists and they were unbending, and a splinter group of that faction was actually even more militant and did some nasty things to their fellow Jews. So that was one division, but there's also divisions. There's religious secular division, but that wasn't actually that big a deal then. But there was each wave of immigrants had to kind of bump up against the people who came before. So by the time the German Jews were coming into Palestine in the 1930s, the Russian and Polish Jews had been there for quite a while, and the German Jews were like the greenhorns, and there was a divide between Russian, Polish, the Eastern Europe Jews and the German Jews, and that goes back to when they were in Europe. The German Jews of the time were looked down on the Eastern European Jews, and then when they came to Palestine, they were kind of in a lower position for a while, and they were looked down upon and made fun of, so the things got reversed. Anyway.
Yeah, I understand there are many currents, and there were the kind of kibbutz, people who had gone to the kibbutz, the more extreme groups, the more moderate groups. But my question was really related in terms of the book, the strong tension you see today between the Haredi, the very religious Jews, and the secular Jews. Do you feel like that this book is really kind of excavating the roots of that in some way, or?
So it touches on questions of religion and belief, for sure, and the secular religion. But there's some of that in the book, for sure. But yes, there is a divide between religious and secular, and it also the political divisions. Yeah, it's in there for sure.
Yeah, just a brief comment. I loved how you nailed the attitude of the father, the Orthodox Jewish father, and his disregard for his daughter's initiative or inclination, and him poo-pooing that. That was just brilliant. I thought it was perfect. Something I'm familiar with.
Sorry to hear that.
So,
You can continue on, yeah.
I was going to ask, do you have a background in the history of the time, or do you do a lot of research to prepare to write the novel?
I did a lot of research for this book, yes. Hello? Yes, I did a lot of research for this book. It took me a long time to write it. I took a number of trips. I went to Israel a few times. I found going to Israel was problematic in a way. I was looking for buildings and landscapes that would be that would take me back to that time, the 1930s and 40s. And I found a few buildings, but in the meantime, there's high-rises around them, and the scenery has changed so much. So I found it was more useful to look at old photographs and to imagine myself into the old photographs. I did, in terms of background, I did a lot of reading, and I read newspapers of the time. I was able to do that. And I went to archives, etc. Yeah, you never do enough.
So just a question this time. As a writer, after you've written your book and you've edited it and you're comfortable, how do you know that you're done? That it's ready?
How do you know it's ready?
For you, how did you know that you were done?
In this case, with this book, I got to an end that I liked. I felt I had the end. But then there's lots of, there's always more editing in terms of the final. There's a deadline eventually with the publisher. So if there isn't, then it's never finished.
It's imposed externally for you?
Yes, there is.
And you said it took a long time. How long?
It took me 7 years to write this book, yeah. There are a lot of pages in it.
And do you have a lot of notes in the back for like all the research that you did, or was
No,
it...
I had considered putting that in, but I didn't. There were enough pages.
Yeah, that's what I wonder for like historical fiction, like some people do and some people don't.
Yeah.
So, I'm writing a little bit like that too, and I'm, keeping sort of track of them, but I don't know whether I'm actually going to put them in the back in the end, so.
Well, it's not a bad idea. Yeah, and it's interesting, but the list would have been really long,
Yes.
so I'm not sure what it would really add.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions?
That was just really enjoyable. I agree. You've really had a really good picture of the father and the daughter.
Thank you.
Yeah, very
Thank you
descriptive.
very much. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being great on.